Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When Andrew McCoy returned to his secluded lakeside cabin, he expected peace. Instead, he found signs claiming his land and a ruthless HOA president ready for war. What began as a weekend getaway turned into a legal and personal battle for legacy, justice, and survival. I hadn't been up to the cabin in nearly a month, and as I turned off the main road onto the familiar dirt path, a calm settled over me. The city, with its endless noise and fluorescent glow, felt a million miles away. Here, surrounded by towering pines and the soft lap of water against the shore, I could finally breathe. My old Jeep rattled over the gravel as I rounded the last bend, the cabin coming into view at the edge of the lake like a quiet sentinel. But something was off. I slowed to a crawl, squinting at the parking area near the dock. A brand new sign stood proudly at the edge of the lot. Private HOA parking, members only. The letters were big, bold, official-looking. I frowned, pulling closer. Another sign had been staked right at the entrance to the cabin's drive. Cabin occupied illegally. Contact HOA for access. What the hell? I killed the engine and stepped out, gravel crunching under my boots. The breeze smelled of pine and damp earth, but the peacefulness had cracked. As I walked toward the parking lot, a figure emerged from behind an SUV, a woman, thin, impeccably dressed, sunglasses perched on her nose despite the overcast sky. She carried a clipboard like a weapon. "Excuse me," she called, striding toward me with practiced authority. "Can I help you?" "I was about to ask you the same thing," I replied, keeping my tone even. "This is my property. I don't remember authorizing any new signage." She smiled, tight and condescending. "Oh, you must be Mr. McCoy. Karen Lawrence, president of the Ridgeview Homeowners Association." She extended a manicured hand, which I ignored. "There's been a rezoning. This area's been incorporated into Ridgeview HOA jurisdiction as of last month. You're technically on common property now." I stared at her, feeling heat rise in my chest. "I own this land. It's been in my family for 80 years. I've got the deed in my glove box if you'd like a look." Karen's smile sharpened. "I'm sure you believe that. But according to our updated plat maps, this parcel is within HOA boundaries. If you'd like to continue using the cabin, you'll need to apply for membership. There's a $100,000 initiation fee and $20,500 monthly dues. Otherwise, we'll begin eviction proceedings in 7 days." I couldn't help the laugh that escaped me. "Yeah, no thanks." Her lips pursed. "I suggest you reconsider." I shook my head, turning back toward my Jeep. "You'll be hearing from me." "Or from our legal department," she called after me. I climbed into the Jeep, heart pounding, not from fear, but from the absurdity. I'd come here for peace. Instead, I'd walked straight into a bureaucratic ambush, and I had a sinking feeling this was just the beginning. The next morning, I packed up supplies and drove back up the mountain, determined to get to the bottom of whatever stunt Karen and her HOA were pulling. But as I rounded the last curve leading to my cabin, my stomach dropped. Across the driveway, right where my access road met the parking lot, stood a line of concrete barricades, each one stamped with the Ridgeview HOA logo in bright red paint. Behind them, parked deliberately across the lane, sat 2 white pickup trucks with flashing yellow lights. And flanking the trucks were 4 men in neon vests, arms crossed, radios clipped to their belts like they were guarding Fort Knox. I slowed to a stop, stepping out of the Jeep. "You've got to be kidding me." One of the men, a tall, broad-shouldered guy with a shaved head and mirrored sunglasses, stepped forward. "This area's closed, sir," he said flatly. "Private HOA property. No unauthorized access." I stared at him, incredulous. "This isn't HOA property. This is my land. I own it. Move the barricades." He smirked. "You'll need to take that up with the board. We've been instructed not to let anyone through without HOA clearance." I felt my hands clench into fists. "You're blocking my driveway. That's illegal. You're trespassing." Another guy, shorter but stockier, piped up. "Far as we're concerned, this is community land. You're the trespasser, buddy." I pulled out my phone. "Fine, let's let the sheriff decide." I started dialing, but before the call connected, the tall one stepped closer. "Hey, no need to escalate," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "We're just doing our job." "Your job's illegal," I shot back. "And unless you want a lawsuit, you'd better clear the road." He didn't budge. Instead, he motioned to the others. "Looks like he's not getting the message." That's when things turned physical. The stocky guy moved to block me as I tried to walk around the barricade. His hand clamped onto my arm. "You're not going through." "Get your hands off me," I snapped, jerking free. Another grabbed my shoulder from behind. Instinct kicked in. I twisted, breaking his grip, and shoved him backward. He stumbled into the barricade. The tall guy lunged, but I sidestepped and drove my elbow into his ribs, sending him doubling over with a grunt. "Back off!" I shouted, stepping into a defensive stance. For a second they hesitated, sizing me up. I wasn't a small guy, and years of wrestling in college hadn't exactly faded, but two others were moving in from the side, hands out like they meant business. Then I heard it, the distinct crunch of tires on gravel. A siren chirped once. Relief flooded me as I turned to see a sheriff's cruiser pulling up behind my Jeep, dust swirling around its tires. The deputy stepped out, hand resting casually on his holster. "Everything all right here, folks?" I took a deep breath, straightening. "Not really, officer. These guys are blocking my driveway. On my land." The tall guy recovered enough to speak. "We're authorized by Ridgeview HOA. This is private community property." The deputy raised an eyebrow. "And you are?" "Andrew McCoy," I said, pulling out my ID. "Owner of this parcel. Got the deed in my truck if you need it." The deputy nodded slowly. "Let's take a look." As I walked back to retrieve the paperwork, I glanced over my shoulder at the barricades, the so-called guards, and the smug confidence still lingering on their faces. They really thought they owned this place. They had no idea what they'd just started. I handed the deputy the deed, watching as he flipped through the papers with methodical care. His eyes scanned each line, his thumb pausing over the survey coordinates, the official stamps, the signatures. He let out a low whistle under his breath. "Well, Mr. McCoy," he said, glancing up at me, "these look pretty damn official to me." I nodded. "They are. My grandfather bought this land 80 years ago. It's been in my family ever since. That cabin, the lake, the parking lot, you name it, it's mine." Behind us, the HOA security team shifted uneasily. The tall guy with the sunglasses spoke up again, his tone more defensive now. "But we were told this is HOA jurisdiction." Our president showed us the updated maps. The deputy turned toward him, lips twitching into something between a smile and a grimace. "You got those maps on you?" The tall guy faltered. No. Ma'am's got them." She said. "Let me guess," the deputy interrupted. "Karen Lawrence?" I couldn't help a dry chuckle. "You know her?" He sighed, folding the papers and handing them back to me. "Oh, I know her. Been out to Ridgeview a few times over the years. She's persistent." Persistent wasn't the word I'd use. "Look," the deputy continued, addressing the guards, "unless you folks have a court order or some official document proving this land's under HOA control, you've got no right to block this man's access. You're trespassing. And you," he pointed at the barricades, "better move those before I start writing tickets." The tall guy opened his mouth, then closed it, jaw tightening. He exchanged glances with the others. "We were just following orders," he muttered, turning away. "Yeah, well, next time, follow the law instead," the deputy shot back. One by one, they climbed into their trucks and backed them away from the drive. A tow chain rattled as they dragged the barricades aside, leaving deep grooves in the gravel. As they pulled off down the road, the tall guy gave me one last glare through the window, then disappeared around the bend. The deputy watched them go, then turned to me. "You might want to keep this paperwork handy," he advised. "Something tells me this isn't the last time you'll be showing it." I sighed, tucking the folder under my arm. "Yeah, I figured. Thanks for the help, officer." "No problem. You call us if they try this again. Or anything worse." He tipped his hat and headed back to his cruiser. As the engine rumbled to life, I stood there a moment, staring at the empty driveway, the quiet trees swaying overhead. It should have felt like a victory, but the knot in my gut told me otherwise. Sure enough, as the patrol car disappeared down the hill, I heard the distant hum of another engine approaching. A sleek black SUV pulled up beside the now cleared lot. The window rolled down to reveal Karen herself, her smile razor sharp. "Enjoy it while you can, Mr. McCoy," she called sweetly. "This isn't over." I smiled back, just as cold. Looking forward to it, she revved the engine and sped off, kicking up a cloud of dust in her wake. I turned toward the cabin, feeling the weight of what lay ahead. They thought they could bully me off my own land. They didn't know who they were dealing with. Not yet. The letter arrived 2 days later, tucked neatly into a certified envelope marked with the HOA's return address. I sat at the cabin's small kitchen table, steam curling from a mug of coffee as I slid it open with my pocket knife. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Notice of legal action. I read it twice to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. The Ridgeview Homeowners Association was suing me. Their claim? That the parking lot and a portion of the lake were misattributed private land that had always been intended as community recreational space. They were seeking an injunction to seize the area under common use provisions of their charter. I leaned back in my chair, letting out a long, bitter laugh. Bold. I'd give them that. Without wasting a second, I pulled out my phone and dialed Lisa Rogers, a friend from law school turned real estate attorney. If anyone could cut through this nonsense, it was Lisa. "Hey, Drew," she answered, her voice bright and no nonsense. "What's up?" I didn't bother sugarcoating it. "I just got served by an HOA that thinks they own my lake." There was a pause, then a low whistle. "Tell me everything." I gave her the rundown, Karen, the barricades, the phony parking signs, the showdown with the deputy, and now this lawsuit. By the time I finished, she was already scribbling notes. "Send me scans of every document you've got, the deed, survey maps, any family records. I'll pull property records from the county clerk's office too. If they're basing this on an old plat, we'll need to nail down the chain of title." "Already ahead of you," I said, snapping photos with my phone. "You're going to want to dig deeper," Lisa added. "Sometimes these HOAs operate off grandfathered claims or shady easements nobody remembers. But if your families own that land continuously and it was excluded from their zoning, they've got no leg to stand on. Karen claims they've got updated maps that show it as community land." Lisa snorted. "Yeah, well, I've seen those updated maps before. Half the time, there's someone's kid photoshopping a line with MS Paint." I cracked a grin to spite myself. "Feels about right." "Listen, Drew, don't talk to them directly anymore. Everything goes through me. I'll file a response and a countersuit if needed, and we'll want to start gathering affidavits from anyone who can verify the land's been yours. Neighbors, old HOA members, anyone." I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "Got it." After we hung up, I spent the rest of the day digging through the old filing cabinet in the cabin's back room. My grandfather had been a meticulous record keeper. Sure enough, I found yellowed deeds, maps annotated in his precise handwriting, and a brittle envelope containing a letter from the original land surveyor, dated back to 1942. Every scrap felt like another brick in the wall. But I wasn't naive. Karen wouldn't have filed if she didn't think she could win, or at least exhaust me into giving up. That wasn't happening. By sunset, I had a manila folder stuffed with copies, ready for Lisa. Before heading back into town, I stood on the porch overlooking the lake. The water glimmered orange under the fading light, peaceful and still. It wasn't just a piece of land. It was my family's legacy, and they were going to have to pry it from my cold, dead hands. It started with flyers. I'd barely been back in town for a day when I noticed them stapled to telephone poles, tucked under windshield wipers, and taped to shop windows. Bold, all-caps letters screamed from cheap printer paper. "Lake stolen! Local lawyer blocks community access to water. Join the fight." I tore one down and read the fine print. A community meeting was scheduled for Saturday at the Ridgeview Community Center. The signature at the bottom, Karen Lawrence, president of the Ridgeview HOA. I felt my jaw tighten as I crumpled the flyer in my hand. So that was her next move, dragging this fight into the court of public opinion. Saturday couldn't come fast enough. When I arrived at the community center, the parking lot was packed. I counted at least 50 cars, a mix of SUVs and sedans, with families lingering around, folding tables, offering lemonade and cookies. It looked more like a neighborhood potluck than a meeting. But once inside, the tone shifted. Karen stood at the front of the room behind a podium, microphone in hand. Beside her hung a blown-up map of Ridgeview, the lake highlighted in bright yellow, a bold dotted line carving a boundary through my property. "Thank you all for coming," she began, voice smooth, eyes gleaming. "We're here today to stand together against injustice. For decades, this lake has been the heart of our community. Families have fished here, children have swum here, neighbors have gathered here, and now—" She paused for dramatic effect. "One man wants to take that away." A murmur rippled through the crowd. I raised my hand. "Mind if the accused speaks?" Heads turned. Karen's smile faltered, then snapped back into place. "Mr. McCoy," she said sweetly. "By all means." I stepped forward, pulling the deed and survey copies from my folder. Folks, I know many of you. My family's owned this land for 80 years. My grandfather let people use the lake out of kindness, not obligation. It's private property. Always has been. Karen waved dismissively. That's his version of history, but we've found records, maps that show intended community use. He's twisting the truth. A man near the front stood up. Why can't you just let us keep using it? You don't even live here full time. I met his gaze. Because it's my land. And now your HOA wants to charge me to access my own driveway, block my road, sue me in court. You think that's fair? The room buzzed with whispered arguments. Karen leaned into the mic. We're not here to argue legalities tonight. We're here to organize. She distributed a clipboard. We're forming a task force to pressure Mr. McCoy to do the right thing. I shook my head in disbelief. You mean harass me? Karen ignored me, passing the clipboard through eager hands. By the time I left, a few neighbors offered quiet apologies, but more looked at me like I'd kicked their puppy. The smear campaign was working. It got worse. The next morning, I arrived at the cabin to find deep gouges carved into the front door, as if someone had taken a crowbar to it. The path lights along the drive were smashed, shards glittering in the dirt. A crude sign hung from the porch railing. Community land. Get out. I walked the perimeter and found tire tracks cutting across the yard, leading down to the lake's edge. Beer cans floated among the reeds. I called the sheriff immediately. When the deputy arrived, he photographed the damage, took my statement, and sighed heavily. Looks like things are escalating. Yeah, I muttered, kicking a crushed soda can aside. That's one word for it. Before he left, he handed me his card. If you've got security cameras, check the footage, and be careful. These HOA disputes, they can get ugly. Later that afternoon, I reviewed the recordings from the motion cameras I'd installed last month. Grainy night footage showed two figures, young, hooded, moving quickly, bashing the lights with a baseball bat before darting off into the woods. I didn't recognize them, but they couldn't have been older than 16. I saved the clips to a flash drive and emailed them to Lisa with the subject line, "It's getting personal." That evening, sitting on the porch with a cold beer in hand, I watched the sun sink behind the treetops, casting the lake in gold. The peace I'd once felt here was gone, replaced by a gnawing sense of siege. And something told me Karen wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. It was just past noon when I heard a knock at the cabin door. I opened it to find John Wallace standing there, a grizzled man in his 60s, faded baseball cap, weathered hands. He used to serve on the Ridgeview HOA board years ago, before Karen wormed her way to the top. "Mind if I come in, Andy?" he asked, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "Sure thing, John," I said, stepping aside. He lowered himself into one of the old kitchen chairs, rubbing his palms together. "Look, I ain't here as the enemy. Hell, I don't even agree with what they're doing. I thought you ought to know." I raised an eyebrow. "Know what?" He pulled a folded bundle of papers from his jacket pocket and slid them across the table. Minutes from a board meeting, back in '04. Karen never logged them in the official archive, kept them off the books. I unfolded them carefully. The pages were yellowed but legible. My eyes scanned the lines, and there it was, plain as day. A motion passed excluding my family's land from HOA jurisdiction when Ridgeview was incorporated. Parking lot, lake, cabin, everything. It wasn't even a close vote. "She's been lying to the board this whole time," I muttered. John nodded grimly. "Told everyone it was a clerical error. Said your granddad signed a provisional agreement to rejoin the HOA. But I was there. Never happened." A slow grin crept across my face. "You willing to testify to that?" "Damn right I am," John said. "She's turned this place into a circus. Someone's got to call her bluff." I thanked him and made copies of the documents immediately, emailing them to Lisa along with a note. Bombshell evidence. Later that afternoon, another knock came. This time, Susan, a neighbor from across the ridge. "I just wanted to say, I don't agree with what Karen's doing," she told me softly. "If you need someone to speak up, I'll back you." Word was spreading. People were starting to see through the facade, but the harassment wasn't over. That evening, my phone buzzed with an alert from the driveway camera. I pulled up the feed to see two teenagers creeping along the fence line. One hoisted a bolt cutter. The other tried prying at the gate's lock. I called the sheriff without hesitation. By the time deputies arrived, the kids were still fumbling at the chain, caught red-handed. Turns out they were the sons of a board member who'd been at the community meeting. Their parents arrived red-faced and apologetic as the deputies rid them the riot act. I chose not to press charges for now, but made it clear this was the last warning. That night, I sat on the porch again, documents and testimonies piling up like ammunition. Every step they took only tightened their noose. And with John's records in hand, I felt something I hadn't in weeks: momentum. They thought they'd isolate me. But piece by piece, their wall was cracking, and soon it was all going to come down. A few days later, the envelope arrived, thick, heavy, stamped with a lawyer's seal. Lisa opened it while I sat across from her desk, watching her expression darken as she flipped through the pages. "They're offering a settlement," she said flatly. "They'll drop the suit if you agree to transfer the parking lot and grant permanent access to the lake for community use. No compensation for you, of course." I snorted. "Generous." Lisa tossed the papers aside. "They're fishing. They know they're on thin ice. This is a bluff to scare you into caving." I leaned back in the chair. "Not happening." She nodded approvingly. "Didn't think so. We'll reject it and file a motion to dismiss." That night, the smear campaign kicked into high gear. Someone created a Facebook page called Save Our Lake, plastered with doctored images of me smiling smugly while children cried behind a chain-link fence. Posts accused me of hoarding natural resources, of threatening local kids, of destroying the soul of the community. They even tagged my law firm's account. I stared at the screen, equal parts angry and impressed by their audacity. They really went all out. Lisa's reply was curt. "Ignore the noise. Focus on the case." Still, it stung. Even friends from town started messaging me, confused by the barrage of claims. I spent hours answering texts, sending copies of deeds, trying to remind people that facts mattered, and then came the footage. My cameras caught two figures sneaking onto the property under cover of night, one with a spray can, the other with a hammer. By morning, my cabin's sidewall was tagged with "thief" in bright red paint, and one of the porch posts had been split clean through. I forwarded the video to the sheriff and Lisa. "Same kids?" I asked. "Not this time," the deputy replied grimly. "We're running plates from their getaway car," Lisa called minutes later. "We're adding vandalism and harassment to the countersuit. And I'm subpoenaing Ridgeview's internal communications. If Karen coordinated any of this, we'll find it." I stepped outside, looking over the damage. The lake shimmered in the moonlight, calm despite the chaos swirling around it. They wanted me rattled. They wanted me cornered. But every move they made just added fuel to my fire. They didn't realize it yet, but they were making my case for me. The courtroom was packed. I hadn't expected so many people. Every seat on the wooden benches was filled. Neighbors, HOA members, curious locals, even a couple of reporters scribbling in notepads. Karen sat at the plaintiff's table, surrounded by her legal team, dressed in an expensive navy suit and pearls that gleamed under the lights. She looked like she'd walked straight off the cover of a suburban lifestyle magazine, all smiles and confidence. I sat beside Lisa at the defense table, hands folded, my folder of documents neatly stacked in front of me. She glanced over and gave me a reassuring nod. "We've got this." The judge entered, and the room hushed. "Let's proceed," he said, his voice gravelly with authority. Karen's lawyer stood first, launching into a polished speech about decades of implied community use, historical access, and the moral imperative of preserving public resources. He gestured dramatically toward the enlarged map they'd mounted on, an easel with bold yellow lines carving a boundary right through my land. When it was Lisa's turn, she rose calmly, unrolling a set of older maps and laying them before the judge. "Your Honor, the plaintiff's claim rests on a reinterpreted map drafted 20 years after Mr. McCoy's family acquired the land. Here," she tapped a dated survey, "is the original boundary verified by the county recorder. And here," she produced John's meeting minutes, "is a record of the HOA board's formal exclusion of this property from Ridgeview jurisdiction in 2004. Murmurs rippled through the room. Karen's jaw tightened. "Furthermore," Lisa continued, "we have testimony from John Wallace, a former board member who witnessed that vote, and evidence that these minutes were deliberately withheld from official records." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Deliberately withheld?" Lisa nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, and that's not all. We've also traced defamatory online posts back to the plaintiff's household IP address, posts targeting my client with false claims meant to sway public opinion." The courtroom went still. Karen shot to her feet. "Objection. This is irrelevant." "Overruled," the judge said coolly. "Sit down, Ms. Lawrence." Lisa handed over the IT report, her voice steady. Your Honor, the HOA's actions go beyond a property dispute. They amount to harassment, defamation, and an attempt to unlawfully seize private land. Karen's face flushed deep red. She muttered something under her breath, but the judge's gaze pinned her in place. We'll recess until tomorrow for final arguments, he announced, banging the gavel. As the crowd filed out, Karen's glare found me across the aisle. Her smile was gone now, replaced by something brittle and desperate. Lisa leaned closer. She's unraveling. I exhaled slowly, feeling a weight lift from my chest. Not fast enough, but inside, for the first time in weeks, I felt it. The tide was turning. And tomorrow, we'd finish what they started. The next morning, the courtroom buzzed with quiet anticipation. People filed back into their seats, whispers bouncing off the wood-paneled walls. Karen sat rigid at the plaintiff's table, hands clenched tight in her lap, her lawyer murmuring urgently beside her. I could see the cracks forming, her polished exterior slipping away under the weight of the past few weeks. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. Before we proceed to closing statements, he began, adjusting his glasses, I've reviewed the submitted evidence thoroughly, including supplemental materials from the defense. He paused, letting his gaze sweep the room. Frankly, I see no need to waste the court's time any further. Karen's head snapped up. Your Honor, he raised a hand sharply. Ms. Lawrence, you will remain silent unless addressed. She shut her mouth, her lips trembling. The judge continued. The deed is clear. The survey records are clear. The exclusion of the McCoy property from HOA jurisdiction was properly voted on and recorded, regardless of later omissions from official archives. He tapped the file before him. And the actions taken by the HOA, blocking access, attempting to enforce dues, filing frivolous claims, and engaging in harassment, are wholly unjustified. A ripple of shock moved through the gallery. I felt Lisa's hand squeeze my shoulder. Therefore, the judge said, voice firm, the plaintiff's claims are dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I am ordering the Ridgeview HOA to remove all unauthorized barriers, signs, and structures from Mr. McCoy's property within 7 days. The HOA will also pay damages to Mr. McCoy in the amount of $500,000, covering legal fees, property damage, and emotional distress. Gasps erupted behind us. And the judge added, his gaze sharpening. Given the evidence of withheld records and falsified claims, I am referring this matter to the county prosecutor for investigation into possible fraud, perjury, and malicious prosecution. Karen's face drained of color. She stood abruptly. This is outrageous, she shouted. You're all against me. This is a conspiracy. Ms. Lawrence, the judge warned, you are dangerously close to contempt of court. I won't be silenced, she shrieked, knocking over her chair as she lunged toward the bench. 2 deputies intercepted her before she could get within 10 feet, pinning her arms as she struggled. Let go of me, she screamed. You'll regret this. I'll sue every last one of you. The judge sighed, rubbing his temples. Take her into custody. As the deputies escorted her out, the courtroom buzzed with whispers and murmured disbelief. Karen's lawyer quietly packed his briefcase, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. Lisa exhaled beside me, grinning. Well, she said softly, that was satisfying. I managed to smile, my chest tight with relief. More than satisfying. We gathered our things, walking out into the bright afternoon sun. Reporters waited by the courthouse steps, calling my name, flashing cameras, asking for statements, but I wasn't interested in giving interviews. Not yet. I just wanted to go home. As Lisa flagged down a cab, I stood for a moment at the curb, staring up at the clear blue sky. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. It was over, at least the legal part. But the land, that was mine, and always would be. A week later, the last of the barricades were gone. I stood at the end of the drive, hands on my hips, watching as a work crew hauled off the concrete blocks with a flatbed truck. The private HOA parking signs had been pulled down, leaving only empty posts sticking out of the dirt like broken teeth. For the first time in months, the road to my cabin was clear, open, unobstructed, mine. Lisa had stopped by earlier with the final paperwork, a thick folder of stamped court orders and legal confirmations. All wrapped up, she'd said, her grin wide. And the check from the HOA's insurance carrier is on its way. I'd thanked her, but the money wasn't what mattered most. It was the quiet. It was standing on my own land, without anyone telling me where I could park, Who could swim? What dues I owed. It was knowing Karen was no longer a looming shadow over the lake. I spent the next few days transforming the old parking lot. The asphalt was ripped up and replaced with fresh earth and sod. I dug out a shallow pond fed by a spring trickling down the hillside, ringed it with flat stones, planted wildflowers around its edges. At the far end, I built a small dock with a bench, a perfect spot to sit with a coffee or cast a line at sunrise. I hung a new sign on the gate, "Private land, not HOA. Trespassers will be prosecuted." Simple, clear, unapologetic. The neighbors who'd stood by me came over that weekend. John brought ribs. Susan made peach cobbler. A few others carried folding chairs and coolers. We grilled by the water, watched the sun dip below the pines, laughed late into the night under a sky crowded with stars. At one point, I caught sight of a familiar white SUV slowing as it passed the entrance. The driver, one of Karen's former lieutenants, glanced toward us, then quickly looked away and kept going. I didn't wave, didn't need to. As the fire crackled and someone handed me another beer, I felt a deep, quiet satisfaction settle in my chest. Not triumph, not gloating, just peace. A hard-won peace that tasted even sweeter because of the fight it took to earn it. Later, sitting alone on the dock, toes skimming the cool water, I stared across the lake, the moonlight shimmering on its surface. This place wasn't just dirt and trees. It was history, memory, family. It was the echo of my grandfather's voice teaching me to cast a fishing line, the warmth of my father's laughter as we hauled a canoe ashore, the quiet solitude I'd always found here, even when the world outside tried to steal it away. They thought they could bully me off it, thought they could wear me down, break me, push me aside. But the thing about legacy? It doesn't scare easy. I leaned back on the bench, arms stretched behind my head, gazing up at the endless night sky. Finally, home.